Welcome to AI Debates, where we dive into the most controversial topics in movies and TV shows through structured AI-driven discussions. Spoiler alert: this debate contains major spoilers for Breaking Bad, including key plot points, character fates, and the overall development of Walter White, Gus Fring, and Saul Goodman. Today, we'll be tackling three of Breaking Bad's biggest moral dilemmas. Was Walter White truly evil, or was he forced into crime by his circumstances? Was Gus Fring a true villain, or just a businessman in a ruthless world? Was Saul Goodman just as morally corrupt as the criminals he represented? Our debaters today are Sophia, who will defend Walter White's choices, argue that Gus Fring was simply running a business, and claim that Saul Goodman was just doing his job as a lawyer. Opposing her is Marcus, who will argue that Walter White embraced evil, that Gus Fring was a calculated villain, and that Saul Goodman was far from innocent. This debate will feature a structured back-and-forth exchange, allowing both sides to challenge each other's perspectives. Round 1. Was Walter White truly evil, or just a man forced into crime? Let's begin.
Walter White was not evil. He was a desperate man who made the only choices available to him. His transformation into Heisenberg wasn't about power at first, it was about survival. He was a high school teacher struggling to support his family, diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and left with no financial security. He lived in a society where healthcare costs could bankrupt his loved ones. The system failed him, forcing him into the meth business. Yes, his actions became darker over time, but let's not pretend that he started this journey out of greed or malice. He was simply a man trying to provide for his family in the only way he knew how.
That's the narrative Walt wanted everyone to believe, but let's be real. He wasn't forced into crime. He chose it. He had other options. His former business partners, Gretchen and Elliot, offered to pay for his treatment, and he refused out of pride. He could have taken a legitimate path, but he wanted control. The moment he started making money, it stopped being about survival. It became about power, about proving to himself and everyone else that he was the smartest man in the room. He was never trapped. He wanted to be Heisenberg.
That's easy to say in hindsight, but when he first started, he had no reason to believe anyone would help him. He saw his situation as hopeless. And even if you argue that pride played a role, why should that make him evil? If anything, it shows he was still human, flawed but not a monster. His descent into crime was gradual, not instant. The first few times he killed, it was in self-defense. He didn't want to kill Crazy, 8, but he had no choice. Tuco. Self-defense. Gus's men? Self-defense.
Self-defense only explains his early actions. But what about later? What about poisoning Brock? What about ordering the prison massacres? What about letting Jane die when he could have saved her? These weren't desperate decisions. They were cold, calculated moves to eliminate obstacles. He didn't have to kill Mike, but he did. He didn't have to manipulate Jesse's emotions over Jane, but he did. He enjoyed being Heisenberg. He didn't just break bad, he embraced it.
Or maybe he was just pushed too far. Every time he tried to leave, something pulled him back in. He didn't kill Mike because he wanted to. He did it in a moment of rage. He didn't poison Brock to kill him, just to manipulate Jesse. Were these horrible choices? Absolutely. But did they make him truly evil? That depends on whether you believe a man can be judged only by his worst moments.
When your worst moments include mass murder, poisoning a child, and destroying everyone around you. Yes, he wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He became the very monster he claimed to fight against.
Round 2. Was Gus Fring a true villain, or just a businessman in a ruthless world?
Gus Fring was not a villain. He was a businessman operating in a brutal industry. He ran his empire efficiently and with discipline. He wasn't reckless like Walter, nor was he needlessly violent like the cartel. Everything he did was calculated and professional. He didn't kill for sport. He eliminated threats only when necessary. He employed people, built an empire, and maintained order in a world where chaos was the norm. If anything, he was a stabilizing force compared to the reckless violence that people like Walter and Tuco brought into the business.
Gus wasn't just a businessman. He was a cold-blooded killer who thrived on revenge and control. He slaughtered an entire cartel just to satisfy his personal vendetta. He tormented Hector Salamanca for years, keeping him alive just so he could see his family get wiped out. That's not just business, that's personal. Gus didn't just eliminate threats, he took pleasure in destroying his enemies.
But that's the key difference. He only targeted his enemies. He wasn't out of control like Walter. He didn't let emotion dictate his every move. His actions were controlled, deliberate, and strategic. If Walt had followed Gus's method instead of letting his ego run wild, he could have survived much longer. Gus represented order, whereas Walter represented chaos.
Order doesn't excuse mass murder. Gus was patient and disciplined, but that doesn't make him less of a villain. His empire was built on manipulation, violence, and intimidation. He used children as drug mules, he ordered brutal executions, and he pretended to be a respectable businessman while secretly running a meth empire. Just because he was smoother than Walt doesn't mean he was any less dangerous.
Round 3. Was Saul Goodman just as morally corrupt as the criminals he represented?
No, Saul Goodman was not as corrupt as the criminals he represented. Unlike Walter White or Gus Fring, Saul never killed anyone, ran a drug empire, or ordered people to die. He was a lawyer who exploited the system but didn't create it. If he had never met Walter White, he likely would have continued his low-level schemes, helping small-time criminals avoid legal trouble. But he wasn't inherently evil. He was an opportunist, someone who adapted to survive in a corrupt world. Yes, he enabled crime, but that doesn't put him on the same level as the murderers and kingpins he worked with.
That's just an excuse, Sophia. Saul may not have pulled the trigger, but how many lives were ruined because of his involvement? He was directly responsible for helping Walter build his empire. He introduced him to Gus, he arranged for money laundering, and he constantly helped him evade justice. He manipulated Jesse, helped steal his money, and even suggested killing him when he became a liability. Just because he wasn't violent himself doesn't mean he wasn't morally responsible. He didn't just go along with crime, he profited from it and fueled it.
But you're ignoring the fact that Saul tried to set limits. He never wanted things to spiral into cartel warfare. He wanted to make money without getting his hands dirty. When Walter started going too far, Saul tried to back out, but by then he was in too deep. He was dealing with dangerous people who wouldn't let him just walk away. You can say he enabled crime, but at his core, he was a survivor, not a mastermind.
That's not an excuse. He had multiple chances to leave, but chose to stay because it was making him rich. He didn't just facilitate crime. He actively made things worse by covering up murders, helping criminals disappear, and constantly finding ways to help Walter escape consequences. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a criminal in a suit, hiding behind legal loopholes while helping some of the most dangerous men in Albuquerque.
But in the end, he took responsibility, something Walter and Gus never did. He could have taken an easy plea deal, but instead, he confessed everything and accepted his fate. That proves he wasn't just another corrupt criminal. If he were truly irredeemable, he would have lied his way out like he always did.
Or maybe he just realized there was no escape left. He ran for years, lived under a fake identity, and only confessed because he had nowhere else to go. That doesn't erase what he did. It just means he ran out of options.
Did Saul Goodman deserve redemption? Or was he always just as corrupt as the criminals he represented? Was Gus Fring a businessman or a villain? And did Walter White truly break bad? Or was he always destined to become Heisenberg? The answers, as always, depend on perspective. Thank you for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and tell us what topic we should debate next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new AI debate. See you in the next one.